Owl by F.A.M. Webster. Alison Mercer was one of the loveliest creatures ever created by the good God. In her case, moreover, beauty was something more than merely skin deep. One came to gasp at the sheer loveliness of her pale face and the perfect proportions of her slim body, but stayed to wonder as the days went by, and one came to realize the greater beauties of her stainless soul. Pure gold, clean through, body and soul alike. All white-hot youth and innocence, unafraid and utterly unsoilable. That was Alison Mercer. And because she was what she was, her friends turned up their eyes in horror when they heard of her engagement to Simeon Stroud. Why did she accept his proposal of marriage? You'll have to ask her father about that. You see, no one knows what passed between old Tom Mercer and Alison that time she came back from a skiing holiday in Scandinavia. All Alison saw was that the old man had aged about 100 years in less than 30 days, and her deep sea-green eyes went wide with worry. "Daddy, darling," she expostulated, "you've been gambling again." "Nothing much, my dear. Bit of a flutter," mumbled old Tom uncomfortably. "Leastways, that's what it looked like at first. Hell, how was I to know the darned stock was going to drop 20 points in 24 hours, he exploded. "The fellow gave me a sure tip, I tell you. I can't explain how the certainty came unstuck. All I know is that the chap who landed me in the cart is willing to do the right thing by me. He's awfully anxious to meet you, Alison." "Is he, Daddy? Well, I'll try to be extra nice to him, if he's going to help you out of your troubles." Tom Mercer shot a queer, sidelong look at his daughter, and his eyes were very anxious. "You'll find Stroud a sound sort of fellow," he suggested. "What is he, Daddy? A financier or a company promoter?" "Neither, my dear. He's by way of being a famous archaeologist, and is a great authority on ancient South American civilizations. He's only just back from a big exploration in those parts. I thought he'd know what he was talking about, or I shouldn't have put money into Chilean nitrates." "Oh," shuddered the girl. "Those old Aztecs worshipped birds and wore cloaks of feathers. I can't bear birds, so I hope we'll be able to keep him off that subject." Strangely enough, Alison's first impression of Simeon Stroud when he came to Hawley Grange and was presented by her father awakened in her mind all the horrors of her secret pet obsession. Some people can't stay in the same room with a cat. Others can't stand the sight of snakes or spiders. Alison Mercer couldn't abide the touch of a bird, and once, when a girlfriend had caught a sparrow and placed it, fluttering, in Alison's hand, she had fainted clean away. She loved all God's creatures. Don't let there be any mistake about that. But there was something about the smoothness of a bird's breast and the palpitation of a bird's wings that made her feel physically sick. And Simeon Stroud was like a bird. Not a decent daylight warbler, but some beastly nocturnal fowl that flew on silent wings and peered in through sleeping people's windows with horrible, luminous eyes. Such night fowls live on flesh. But there was nothing predatory about Simeon Stroud's appearance. Upon the other hand, one gathered the impression that this little man was abnormally wise. But one felt also that his knowledge was abysmally evil. Further than that, he had a quick way of turning his head sharply from side to side, and of shooting furtive, inquiring glances all over the place, while he spoke in a queer, twittering sort of voice. His nose, set between wide, staring eyes, descended almost straight from below his forehead and ended in a sharp, underturned point. A soft, fluffy fringe of hair, which encircled his face from one ear to the other, did not improve his appearance. Despite an almost nauseating feeling of revulsion, Alison, probably for the sake of her father, accepted the advances of this strange suitor. The first time he embraced her, the girl nearly fainted, for that fluffy fringe of face hair which he favoured felt horribly soft, just like the breast feathers of a bird, in fact. Her whole body went cold and rigid with sheer, stark terror at his touch, and yet she contrived to accept that first caress without betraying her true feelings. Most people in Hawley referred to the newly engaged couple as Beauty and the Beast, but there was one acknowledgeable student of mythology who likened them, artfully enough, to Pallas Athene and her owl. Alison feared a scene when a light-hearted friend disclosed the nature of their latest nickname, for she knew the violence of her fiancé's temper. But far from being displeased, Stroud positively preened himself, smiling oddly all the time, and finally gave himself a quick shake, for all the world like a bird ruffling up its feathers to get the dust out of them. "After all," he said quietly, "Pallas Athene was one of the most beautiful and virtuous of the goddesses of ancient Greece, while it is generally conceded that the owl is the wisest of birds." "Well, let's hope you won't develop its nocturnal habits after you are married, Mr. Stroud," teased the irresponsible visitor. When they were alone that evening, Alison looked long and thoughtfully at her future husband. He had evidently found that the cap, supplied by the nickname, was a good fit, and was well content to wear it. He really was rather like an owl, she told herself, and for the first time, out there in the half-dark of the veranda, she noted the queer, luminous quality of his tawny gold eyes. Then, as she continued to study him, she saw that the tops of his ears were puckishly pointed. An involuntary shiver ran through her, but she allowed no sign of distress to escape her when he rose presently and came to kiss her good night. When she was alone, however, her head dropped to her folded arms, and her slim shoulders heaved spasmodically. They were to be married soon, and after that there would be no blessed hours of darkness and peace and solitude to follow after that detested evening embrace. She would be the property of Simeon Stroud, body and soul. And again she shuddered at the thought, while there broke from her lips a pitiful little cry. "I'm doing it all for you, Daddy. I'm doing it all for you." A week before Alison's wedding was due to take place, Hugh Davenant arrived home in England. He went straight from the boat to stay with his married sister at Exton, a small village a couple of miles beyond Hawley. Next morning he drove into the town to make some much-needed additions to his wardrobe, for he had worn nothing but the thinnest of garments in the South American tropics, and such European suits as he had brought home with him had been purchased ready-made and were appallingly badly cut. His sister was unable to accompany him, but he had something to tell her upon his return at lunchtime. "They say the world's a small place," he announced, as he unfolded his dinner napkin, "and I'm beginning to believe it." "Did you run across a pal in Hawley, Hugh?" inquired his brother-in-law. "God forbid that I should ever call Simeon Stroud a pal of mine," Davenant answered piously. "So you know our local lion, do you, dear?" queried his sister. "He settled among us about 12 months ago. You'll meet his future wife this afternoon. She's coming over for tennis." Hugh put down his knife and fork hurriedly, and there was a look of real concern on his clear-cut, handsome features. Do you mean to say that man is going to be married?" he queried. "Yes, dear, and to a most charming girl. But why do you ask? He is supposed to be tremendously rich." "Listen, Claudia," said Hugh. "Simeon Stroud may be as rich as Croesus, for all I know. That doesn't alter the fact that he's the most unutterable swine. The South American Indians could tell you some queer tales of his cruelties. But apart from that, I happen to know that he got mixed up with the followers of some horrible, filthy sect out in South America, people who claim to be descendants of the old Aztec priests. Between them, they tried to revive some ancient form of bird worship. But when it came to a question of permitting the sacrifice of young girls to a heathen deity, even a corrupt South American government stuck in its toes and wouldn't stand for that sort of thing." "My lord, someone ought to warn Alison's father," broke in Lambert. "I think you'd find it a pretty thankless task," responded his wife. "Most people imagine that Tom Mercer has sold Beauty to the beast." "That's bad," commented Davenant. "Is she a nice sort of girl?" A slow smile spread over Claudia Lambert's features. "You just wait till you see her, my lad," she answered. When Alison arrived at the Lamberts' place that afternoon, the party was in full swing, and Hugh giving an amazing display of agility on the tennis court. The girl stood quite still, and her breath ceased for an instant as she caught sight of the players. For that lean, bronzed man who bounded agilely about the court with wonderful athletic ease provided the very beau ideal of all her dreams, and she knew instinctively that his hand was of the right size to hold her heart. "I wonder whether you are admiring my brother's superabundant energy or his personal appearance most," said Claudia softly, and Alison came out of her reverie with a self-conscious start. "He's rather a dear," went on Claudia, "and his fitness is perfectly amazing, for he was very badly gassed, to say nothing of being buried alive when a landmine was blown up during the war. By the way, Alison, he's just come home from the parts of South America where Mr. Stroud made all his discoveries, so you'll have something in common to start with when I introduce him to you presently." It was not, however, of South America that Hugh talked to Alison when Claudia presented him at the conclusion of the set. In point of fact, he seemed rather to go out of his way to avoid touching upon that particular topic. When Alison asked him point-blank if he knew her fiancé, he replied shortly that he had met him. After that first meeting, the affair developed with amazing rapidity. If one believed in the existence of such mysterious affinities as soulmates, one would have said that Alison Mercer had found hers, with her first sight of Hugh Davenant playing tennis like a lambent flame on the Lamberts' court. Expressed in more mundane speech, the fact remains that she fell head over heels in love with him right away. And because this was so, and because she was intensely loyal to her father and to the promise she had given to Simeon Stroud, she seemed to Hugh inexplicably cold at their next meeting. It was the day after the Lamberts' party, and Hugh had induced his sister to take him to call at Hawley Grange, because he intended dropping a hint of warning in old Tom Mercer's ear. It wasn't an easy task to perform, for Alison's father was most mysteriously in funds, wherefore, from that old reprobate's point of view, everything was for the best, in this best of all possible worlds. Nonetheless, Hugh knew a great deal more about the activities in South America of Simeon Stroud than he had let fall at his sister's luncheon table. He had heard tales of a temple hidden away in the secret heart of the forest, where men made human sacrifice to a bird, which, even allowing for the extravagance of native legends, must be something quite abnormal in the avian world. Once, on a hunting expedition in that same forest, he had found the body of a young girl, frightfully and filthily mutilated, and with the eyes pecked out upon another occasion, he had met a newly blinded man who ran screaming through the trees, with blood streaming from features which had been torn to ribbons by rending talons. These things he had seen with his own eyes, and men said that it was Simeon Stroud who had discovered the secrets of long-dead Aztec priests, selling his soul in exchange for those secrets, and had revived the awful rites attendant upon the worship of the great bird. Tom Mercer laughed, but took no offence when his young visitor hinted that he should, as a father, make further inquiries before permitting his daughter's marriage to take place. "You're a sly dog, Davenant," he chuckled. "And Alison is a wonderfully desirable girl, but I'm afraid you're a bit too late in the field. We are under great obligations to Simeon Stroud." They had been pacing the terrace of Hawley Grange as they talked. But now Hugh Davenant stopped suddenly in mid-stride. Was he in love with this glorious girl who had come so suddenly into his life? Pity? Ah, yes, he had pitied her from the bottom of his heart, ever since he had heard that she was destined to marry Simeon Stroud. But even though pity is so close to love, as hate is akin to fear, the notion of loving her himself had never entered his head until Tom Mercer had made his covert suggestion. Then, as they stood there, the girl came round the corner of the house, and the man knew, recognising the finger of fate as clearly as the girl had done yesterday, when she had seen him for the first time upon the Lamberts' tennis court, that he loved Alison Mercer with all his soul. The wonder and the glory of the great revelation held him, however, for but the briefest instant. There was something woefully amiss with the present situation. Why were Alison's cheeks wet with tears? What could have happened to bring to her eyes, which normally reflected nothing but the serenity of her soul, that look of sheer, naked terror that now informed them? Why was she trembling? And why came and went her breath in little frightened gasps? Behind her stood Simeon Stroud, who might have answered all those questions. At the sight of her parent, the last shreds of a tremendous determination which had sustained her deserted Alison Mercer. With a little stifled cry, half tears, half laughter, she ran to her father, drawing his protecting arms closely about her body and hiding her face upon his breast. "Why, my precious, why now, what's amiss?" he soothed her, and his voice was wonderfully tender. "Oh, Daddy, oh, it was awful, awful," sobbed the girl. "We were watching the sunset, Simeon and I, and although the light had not yet gone, a great white owl came flying silently out of the woods and settled on my shoulder. It was an owl, and it was different to any owl I've ever seen. Oh, Daddy, it was utterly evil." There, little one, come along to old Nanny. She'll stay with you while you lie down for a bit. Simeon, will you look after Davenant? I'll be coming back with a shotgun shortly. Not too fond of owls myself." "I am sorry," Stroud answered, "but I have an important letter to write before the mail leaves. Perhaps Mr. Davenant will excuse me." When Mercer returned to the terrace a few minutes later, he carried a loaded gun tucked under his arm, and his face was very grave. "Davenant, my boy," he volunteered. "I'm a bluff, John Bull sort of chap, without much imagination, probably. But I'm damned if I like this business." "Miss Mercer has told you what really happened, then?" Hugh questioned sharply. "Yes. It appears that Stroud got a bit amorous round there at the back of the house. Alison swears that when she refused to allow him to kiss her in view of the windows of the servants' quarters, he lost his temper and uttered a most peculiar cry, whereupon, or so she says, that blessed great owl that scared her so badly came winging up from the woods. It may be only her imagination, of course, but she declares that the bird flew straight for her eyes and only settled on her shoulder at a word from Stroud. I suppose you don't think there's anything in all this business?" Hugh did not reply. For long moments he remained leaning against the balustrade, while he puffed thoughtfully at his pipe. Then he, in his turn, asked a question. "One hates to work on hearsay, Mr. Mercer," he stated apologetically, "but local gossip has it that Stroud has got you under his thumb. You can tell me to mind my own business if you like, of course. But frankly, just how deeply are you in his debt?" "I owe him £20,000.
"Was the advance made after he became engaged to your daughter?"
"Yes," said Mercer, speaking very low, and the red colour which flushed his face was no reflection of the setting sun. Hugh dropped a kindly hand upon the old fellow's shoulder. "Transfer your debt to me," he said. "I don't pretend to be a millionaire, but I'd pay a good deal more than the money you owe Simeon Stroud to secure your daughter's happiness." And Tom Mercer looked this sudden saviour in his eyes with startled delight. "Why, yes," he breathed. "That would be one way of setting Alison free, wouldn't it?" The girl herself reacted strangely to the news of her release from the hateful engagement to which she had committed herself for her father's sake. Old Tom, who insisted upon acquainting her with the glad tidings, just as if her salvation was entirely of his own devising, wished to save her the painful task of giving her fiancé his congé in person. But to this plan she would not consent. "No, Daddy," she said firmly. "We're treating Simeon pretty badly anyway. The least I can do, in common decency, is to see him and tell him how sorry I am if the breaking off of our engagement should cause him any pain." "Spoken like my own brave little girl," said her father heartily. "But at least you must let me be present at the interview."
Alison smiled as she shook her head, but she was neither smiling nor feeling particularly courageous as she took her way to the dark house where Stroud lived, deep in the woods. She found him seated in a deep chair in his gloomy, book-lined library. When he rose to greet her, and would have taken her in his arms, she pushed him gently away. "Simeon," she said, pausing just inside the door, "I'm afraid I have come to hurt you. This engagement of ours has been all a dreadful mistake. I have never loved you, and, Simeon, there is something about you, something bird-like, that simply terrifies me. I have tried to go through with it for my father's sake, but, oh, Simeon, I just couldn't face it at all when it came to the final pinch."
Stroud returned to his seat without a word, and then the girl realized, with a half-stifled gasp of horror, that a great owl had fluttered silently out of the shadows and was perched upon the high back of its master's chair. The fascination of the moment was frightful. Man's and bird's alike, the two pairs of eyes fronting her glowed luminous and golden in the half-dark. Man and bird alike seemed to brood, with heads sunk forward, and the girl saw, with a shudder, that each had sharply pointed ears, but whereas those of the great bird were feathered, those of the gross man were tip-pointed with tufts of hair. "So," sneered Simeon, "you do not find yourself able to love me, my fair Alison?"
Oh, please, I'm so sorry," she broke in.
The man silenced her with never a gesture, never a movement, but only by the luminous intensity of the stare he turned upon her. And from close beside his head, the owl stared at her too.
"I was not thinking of you or me," he answered in his soft, bird-like voice. "I was only pitying your father, who must suffer for this sudden folly of yours." Something in the covert sneer aroused the girl's anger. "My father will pay you back the money with which you sought to buy me," she flared back at him. The man rose slowly to his feet and moved towards her down the length of the room. And as he came, the owl fluttered up from the back of the chair and floated forward, not a foot above his head. Bird and man together. They presented an awful picture of incarnate evil. Alison shrank back with a low moan of fear. For Simeon Stroud's hand was rising. Each moment his eyes seemed to grow larger, and his lips were framing the strange call which she felt sure would unloose that grim, familiar fluttering overhead to attack her eyes. Then the unbearable tension was broken. A sharp rap echoed from the panels, and the door was flung open. "Mr. Davenant has called for Miss Mercer, sir," announced a manservant, and Alison ran past him into the well-lit hall where Hugh was waiting. One last frightened look she threw back into the gloomy library. Simeon Stroud still stood there, hand half raised and sombre eyes smouldering in deep sockets. But of the owl that had fluttered above his head, she could see no sign. Next day, Simeon Stroud received his £20,000 from old Tom Mercer's solicitor, and from that time onwards, the folks of Hawley saw him no more. From that time, too, Alison Mercer became a changed woman. All the carefree happiness of girlhood returned to her. She had found love, and she had no fear of taking between her two hands the best of all gifts the gods may bestow upon mortals. But summer had come and gone again before Hugh returned to Hawley to ask for her hand in marriage, and to receive such a joyful assent as set his whole soul singing. They were to be married just before Christmas, and Hugh had taken an old-fashioned furnished house at Oulswood in the Lake District for their honeymoon. The place was in wild country, not far from Ullswater. There was a distinct similarity between the two names, and it never occurred to Hugh that Oul is the Old English form for owl, and that Oulswood is therefore Owl's Wood. Otherwise, he might have chosen another locality for their honeymoon. On the other hand, he might not have done so, for Stroud seemed to have vanished entirely from their lives, and it is doubtful if they ever gave a thought to him until Alison received, among the last of many wedding presents, 4 silver pepper casters, fashioned to represent owls. No card accompanied this gift, but she entertained no doubt as to whence it had come. And yet, for some reason, which she did not even attempt to explain to herself, she did not mention the matter to Hugh. Those 4 silver symbols filled her with a strange, vague dread, and perhaps she feared that mention to Hugh of her former fiancé might cast some shadow upon the magic wonder of their honeymoon. The house at Ullswood proved to be a perfect little gem of steep gabled roofs, leaded and mullioned windows, and oak-panelled rooms. The night they arrived was one of gorgeous moonlight. The bedroom was hot and close, with the resinous reek of the pine logs blazing in the hearth, and Alison set the window wide open before she crept into bed. Midnight was long past when a finger of moonlight stole softly across the floor, crept up the wall, and travelled sveltly on until it rested upon 2 heads, one dark, the other golden, which lay so close to one another. Hugh stirred uneasily and murmured in his sleep, Hugh's sleepy eyes opened, and he turned in search of that beauty of soul and body that the night had given entirely into his keeping. Faint, and from far away, the horned owl's cry came echoing. Hugh's hand stretched out and touched the soft, warm curve of his bride's breast that rose and fell so gently. The lovely warmth of living flesh comforted him, banished the vague fear which the owl's cry had aroused in his half-wakened fancy. A small hand sought for and encircled his fingers. His head sank back upon the pillow. Sleep was returning. Louder and nearer now. Great evil eyes, luminous and eerie, glared in through the leaded panes. Wide wings were spread, and a vast form floated silently towards the open casement. Hugh Davenant turned restlessly and shuddered in his sleep. The moon was gone, swallowed up by a bank of black-bellied clouds. The white mystery circled slowly above the wedded lovers, slumbering in that soft, warm bed. Silence, abysmal darkness, nothing save twin lamps of fear that floated through the gloom. Hugh Davenant dreamed that he was back in a front-line trench in Flanders, and it was as it had been in the beginning. Once more the blind night rocked to the awful roar of big guns. Once more the trench lights soared, green and ghastly, towards the storm-dark skies. And yet, once more, the dreaded northeast gas wind came blowing out of the blackness across no man's land, with death enfolded beneath the silence of its wings silent as those of an owl. The claws of the gas clouds were searching for Davenant's windpipe. Its wings descended upon his face, tearing and rending his flesh. A catch at the back of his throat. Water for breath. Fight it off! Kill those bloody swine in the helmets who were following up the foul veils of death they had let loose. Something was striking at his eyes now. God, if they should blind him. Then at last his hands closed upon living flesh, something human to battle with, something that couldn't kill as the poison gas killed. A soft, human throat, the shrill whistle of life's breath crushed out by merciless hands. Dear God, if he could only see and exult at the sight of starting eyeballs, glimpse the black tongue protruding through snarling lips. Curse this gas helmet that was blinding him. He released his hands to snatch it off and felt his fingers sink into soft feathers, while something tore at his face with rending agony. Oh Christ! Jesus Christ, save me! Weak and agonized, the pitiful prayer echoed in his ears, and he knew, as the mist of dream madness cleared from his brain, that it was around her throat, his wife's throat, that his hands had been locked in the awful death grip. His hand stretched out towards the lamp beside the bed, but before his fingers could find the switch, something soft and feathery struck him in the face again, and again a hooked beak pecked savagely at his eyes. Oh, Jesus Christ, save us both from the power of the beast! Again that feeble, piteous cry for aid, and as if in answer from overhead, a terrifying scream of baffled, evil rage. Hugh's fumbling fingers found the switch. The room was flooded with light, and he saw a great owl, as big as an eagle it seemed, go circling round the room for the last time. As it vanished through the window, Hugh, heedless of the blood streaming from his features, snatched up the revolver, which long habit overseas had accustomed him to placing always upon a table beside his bed, and sprang to the open casement. As he reached the window, the moon sailed into sight, and he saw the great owl flying fast and low above the ground as it circled towards the house for a fresh attack. The vastness of it seemed to fill all the space of night as it rushed upon him, but the man's nerves were steady as chilled steel as he fired again and again, aiming with deadly deliberation to send the heavy bullets smashing into the evil brain behind those luminously glowing eyes. And then it was over. With a last wild shriek, the awful cry of some lost soul hurled down to face everlasting damnation. The great owl heeled over and fluttered slowly to the earth. Alison crept shakily across the room, fingering her bruised throat with tender touch. She closed and barred the casement, and turned to tend the man whose handsome features had been cut to ribbons by the cruel talons of the great bird. And in the morning, a gardener, coming early to his work, found beneath the window of the honeymooning couple the dead body of a man with strangely pointed ears and a fringe of soft hair encircling his features. The rest of his face was unidentifiable, for heavy bullets had smashed their way through between the eyes, and the head was almost blown to pieces. But to whom, save Simeon Stroud, could those pointed hair-tipped ears and that strange fringe of feathery fluff about the chin have belonged? Today's story was The Owl by F.A.M. Webster. It was read by me, Jasper L'Estrange. I do hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, sweet dreams.